Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite. Having a good night's sleep is one of those very underrated luxuries, but it was far from guaranteed if you found yourself aboard a wooden ship in the age of sail, especially perhaps if it was one of those owned by black-hearted pirates. They typically shunned any and all comforts, throwing comfortable bedding overboard and cutting down cabins. And many of them were driven insane by the constant scheming, the plotting of mutinies, making them wake in the middle of the night from terrors and horrified episodes. Today, we'll take a deep dive into the sleeping conditions aboard a pirate ship. The recent years have seen a growing interest in the sleeping conditions of pre-modern people. In 2004, Roger Eckridge published a massive study in which he argued that the 8-hour sleep cycle is a modern invention, a consequence of electric lights and factory work schedules. Before the Industrial Revolution, Eckridge believed that Western Europeans primarily slept in two separate intervals, called the first sleep and the second sleep, separated by a waking period called the watch. People would have their 4-hour or so first sleep, before waking up at around midnight, staying up for a few hours, and then going back to sleep. He based his conclusions on various written documents from the medieval and early modern period mentioning this manner of sleeping, called biphasic sleep. However, the theory proposed by Eckridge has since faced some criticism, with a study released in the mid-2010s analyzing the sleep patterns of modern, pre-industrial societies close to the equator, and finding that none of them experienced biphasic sleep. Eckridge responded to the study, saying that segmented sleep might not have been the predominant pattern of sleep. Therefore, the idea that most people slept in two shifts remains a theory, with the conclusion that some, but not everyone, might have done it. Sailors and pirates might appear like perfect candidates for biphasic sleep. Their lives were dictated by the watch system, where the 24 hours were divided into 4-hour work shifts called watches. It might seem logical then that between 8 PM and 4 AM you'd have your first sleep, then your waking period, before going back to sleep again. You'd catch up on sleep during the rest of the day whenever you had your 4 hours of rest. Thus, you would always have a crew operating the ship 24/7. Some historians have proposed this system of essentially biphasic sleep aboard ships, but it does not appear to always have been the case. For example, George Roberts, a prisoner aboard a pirate ship of Edward Lowe, wrote in some detail about the pirates' nocturnal doctrine. On several occasions, he mentions how the pirates would lie to at night, meaning that all sails were dropped and the ship simply allowed to drift. The ship only needed a skeleton crew to manage in this state, with Captain Lowe giving them the orders to lie to with the ship's head to northwest, to mind the top light, and for the watch to keep a good lookout for any other ships. The previous day, Roberts mentioned only 4 men active during the night watch: a lookout, a mate, the quartermaster, and helmsman. He also mentioned how they went below deck to smoke and have a drink, leaving the weather deck entirely empty, and allowing Roberts to have a private discussion on the quarterdeck. As for the sleep schedule, it appears as if lights out was at 8 o'clock. That is when everyone returned to their ships, and when Roberts went to his hammock. However, he sat up with Captain Lowe and a few others, drinking wine, discussing politics and trade. Perhaps he went to sleep at 10 or 11, and woke up at 5 in the morning, which is shortly before dawn in the Caribbean. Bedtime at 8 does correspond with item 4 from the articles of Captain Bartholomew Roberts, saying that the lights and candles to be put out at 8 o'clock at night. If any of the crew, after that hour, still remain inclined for drinking, they were to do it on the open deck. So based on these two examples, we can presume that most pirates would have gone to bed at 8, slept until 4 or 5, and only kept a handful of men on watch. Of course, if the pirates were pursuing or escaping, the night might look entirely different. But on the average day, it does not seem as if their sleep schedules were all too different from ours. The question is who was put on night watch. We can't presume that they were rotated every night, because that is how watches typically operated. Pirates also had the benefit of having larger crews than merchants, allowing for more watches and longer periods of rest. You simply didn't need everyone working the ship, especially since pirates were often lazy and liked having vessels that didn't need a lot of work, like sloops or brigantines, instead of full-rigged ships. Now that we have talked about the sleep schedule of pirates, how did you actually sleep on a wooden ship? We mostly associate sailors with hammocks, but in the age of pirates, they were relatively new. Originating from the Americas, the hammock had been used for ages by the peoples of the Caribbean, and their comfort, lightness, and ease of use soon made them very popular with adventurers and sailors. By the 1620s, they had become commonplace on European ships in the Americas, while sailors in the Old World still slept in crude cabins. By the 1660s, the English Navy incorporated hammocks aboard its various ships. Each man was allotted his own hammock, and there were plenty in reserve. During combat, hammocks were taken down and mounted along the walls of the ship in order to dampen splintering from cannon shot. For sleeping, hammocks were typically mounted between the guns. Every sailor provided his own mattress, pillow, and blankets. They could also be purchased from the ship's purser. During the day, they could be rolled up inside of the hammock and stowed away. The mattress was over 2 feet wide, which must have caused some issues with spacing, since every sailor was typically only permitted a space 14 inches broad. These mattresses could also be used in combat to plug the holes created by cannon shot, especially below the waterline, to prevent leakage. One of your concerns might be with temperature. Sleeping in a comfortable temperature is essential for most people, and ships in the period did not have any heating or proper ventilation. In Europe, men of war were typically not deployed in winter when it was very cold. The only problem would have been in the summer, especially in the tropical regions. Below deck, it would have been incredibly hot and humid, trapping all of the foul smells of the men and their cargo. For this reason, a lot of sailors and pirates in the colonies preferred to sleep on the open deck. Doing so on land would have been quite uncomfortable. It would still be fairly warm and humid, not to mention the mosquitoes. If pirates went on a land campaign, they would carry a mosquito net with them. We can see it wrapped around the waist of this filibuster, and then put it over their face when sleeping. However, out on the open sea, you had a wind to keep you cool, and no gnats would dare flying out so far. It doesn't appear as if they deployed any hammocks out on the open deck, restricted perhaps to pillows, a blanket, and mattress, plus minus any of those. William Selgrave, when held captive by the pirates of Jeremiah Coughlin, said how they lay rough, as he called it, straight on the deck, not even allowing a bed for the captain. Luckily, Snellgrave himself was able to acquire a hammock. These pirates lived a very Spartan existence, however, with even the cabin lacking any furniture. George Roberts mentioned how Ned Lowe's pirates had hammocks, and Dampier mentioned a merchant crew sleeping on the naked deck, so it could have been up to preference, temperature, availability, and the work culture of the individual crew and ship. There were other reasons besides comfort that pirates might be forced to sleep on the open deck. If their vessel only had a single deck, like a sloop or ketch, it might be so heavily loaded with cargo that there simply wasn't any space below. Pirate crews were often overcrowded, so it might be that some had to sleep below deck and the rest above. Though it might be comfortable to lay rough, considering temperature, it could also be made hell on earth should it start raining. If it so happened, the sailors could either move below deck, or they could rig a sail into a pavilion. This was normally done during the day in a lack of wind, to protect them from the sun. Even worse was sleeping in a canoe. Many pirates were restricted to these kinds of small, undecked vessels, when operating along coastlines, upper rivers, or even out on the open sea. Lying in a canoe was awkward and uncomfortable, even when manned by only a single person. If occupied by multiple, lying down might be impossible, and some pirates would make landfall in order to sleep. In the case of a storm or rain, they would be screwed, unless if they had a tarpaulin to cover themselves with. In general, sailors did not have a lot of spare clothes, and some writers commented on the epidemic of sailors going to bed in wet clothes, a horrible case of bad hygiene. Fresh clothes were one of the most common plunders taken by pirates. Sleeping might have been somewhat superior for the captain and officers. Although Captain Snellgrave mentioned how not even the pirate captain was permitted a bed, other pirates did not obey this rule, following a more hierarchical structure. Even if the pirates lay rough, Dampier mentioned how his captain slept on the deck just behind the whipstaff, on the quarterdeck, where the captain was typically stationed during the day, to oversee the ship. Anyway, a pirate captain might be allowed the privacy of his own cabin. Whilst he could sleep in a hammock in the cabin, typically they were afforded cradles. These were beds built into the walls of the ship, with raised sides. These prevented you from rolling out during a rough sea. The privacy of a cabin might not guarantee your safety. Mutiny, whether it be aboard a man-of-war, merchant, or pirate, often involved the cutting of throats and snoring, assassinating the officers as they lay asleep. Even if mutiny was not an active, serious threat, it sometimes led pirate captains to become paranoid wrecks. Richard Taylor had himself led a mutiny or two, and came from a company with a long history of it. When he himself ascended to captaincy, he was eventually deposed, and when reclaiming his old position, he would frequently pummel groups of gathered men suspected of mutinous sentiment. During the night, he would often wake up from night terrors and reach for his weapons, as claimed by one of his prisoners, Jacob de Bucoy. It doesn't always seem as if pirate prisoners slept especially poorly. Several of them, including George Roberts and William Snellgrave, mostly mentioned their mental concerns as a cause for bad sleep, not the conditions themselves. Otherwise, the pirates were somewhat courteous, allowing them their own hammock, free access to food and drink, and various pirates would often wish Roberts good morning. Lowe himself expressed sympathy for Roberts' bad luck, even though he was the cause of it. Regardless, being a prisoner aboard of a pirate ship might not have been a pleasant experience. If you wish to learn more about what it was like to be imprisoned aboard their ships, please tell me in the comments. And if you wish to learn more about the everyday life of pirates, I can recommend this video about the drinking water aboard. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. Gold Gunpowder produces niche content specializing in pirate history, which doesn't always result in a lot of views. If you want to ensure continued production, the best way of supporting me is by making a one-time donation via PayPal, becoming a channel member, or Patreon supporter. Members and patrons also get early, ad-free access to all of my videos. Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite.